Well, welcome back to the hot seat. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Allan Wilkinson from Buzzercot in Hong Kong. Good morning from me, Allan, but good evening to you over there.
Good evening and good morning.
So, Allan, we've met a few times. You come to PCD events that we've previously done in Hong Kong and Shanghai, but PCD members who've not had the chance to meet you, why don't you explain a little bit about yourself and about Buzzercot in Hong Kong?
Yeah, well, Buzzercot is a full-service accounting firm with about 450 partners and staff in the UK, based in one office in London. And we set up a business in Hong Kong about 7 years ago, it was 2014, really persuaded to do so by many of our business contacts from London who had recently at the time set themselves up in Hong Kong, private client businesses, mainly law firms, and they were encouraging us to do the same because they could see a gap in the market for what we do, which is private client US and UK tax services. So at that time, a couple of my colleagues came out here and started doing the business development, set up an office here and started doing business. And I came here about 3.5 years ago to replace one of them. And we've gone from strength to strength. And from Hong Kong, we serve the whole of the region with those tax services. Most of what we do originates in Hong Kong, but we've got clients in Malaysia, Singapore, mainland China, Japan, all over really.
That's very interesting. And I mean, how does the Hong Kong business tend to fit in with the UK firm? I mean, there's a lot of ties and trends between high net worth clients investing in the UK or other things, but how do you see it, the Hong Kong office fitting into the UK firm?
Yeah, well, most of what we do on the ground here is in that private client space. And as I say, it's UK and US tax services. But we do come across quite a lot of interest from individuals and businesses who are looking to develop something in the UK or relocate to the UK. And so that's where we sort of interact with the mothership in the biggest sort of capacity, is really focusing on that inbound UK work. So, typical scenario is a Hong Kong business looking to, set up an entity in the UK to start trading there as well. And we're just very well placed to do that. And having someone on the ground here, albeit that's not my particular expertise, I'm able to sort of channel that work to the right people into the right place. Okay. So a lot of what I do with respect to the other teams within the firm is a kind of business development and facilitating sort of role.
And what are some of the challenges in getting established in Hong Kong? I mean, you mentioned there 7 years ago you set up, you've been involved for 3. Getting the name and the service offering established amongst the local intermediary and client community there must be exciting, but also carry challenges. What have you found it?
Yeah, it has been very challenging because, obviously in the UK, we're a very established business. We've been around for 100 years and we're very well known in the various niches that we operate in. So that brand awareness obviously means that a lot of work just sort of falls into your lap. When we moved to Hong Kong, when we started our business here, we didn't really have any of that brand recognition in the region. So really, it takes quite a long time to establish that. It's a lot of sort of hard slog on the business development network, going to the events, attending the seminars, that sort of thing. And obviously, the private client dining club is one of those opportunities that helps us to do that. But we are starting to get that brand recognition now. But certainly that was the challenge. It really was, starting from scratch, when really as a practitioner, I'm much more used to people coming to me because they know who Buzzercot is. But so yes, it's been a challenge, but that's actually quite a lot of fun doing that anyway. So, it hasn't been unpleasant by any means.
Yeah, you can really see your progress, can't you, in how you make getting traction in the market, which must be very
yeah. And actually, over the last year, with the pandemic and the restrictions placed on everyone, meaning that you can't necessarily go out and do all of that business development, that was a bit of a worry for me, because I was doing quite a lot of that before the pandemic hit. But we found that quite a lot of work has been coming to us. In fact, we had the best year ever over the last financial year, and that, it really is a sign that we are recognised. That work just comes to us a lot more easily now. So that was quite telling, really, and very rewarding to discover that.
And have you found some of these new digital communication channels? I mean, I've personally found that Asian professionals have been much more adept at adopting these new practices, jumping on webinars, coming on calls, even anti-social hours for the Asian Business Day, in order to get involved and learn. Have you found that, you mentioned before that the Hong Kong office is a hub for other jurisdictions as well in the region, that actually some of your connectivity in ways has improved during this period?
That's a very good point. I would say yes, because people are more willing to meet, even for the first time, remotely, and we're all getting used to that. I have to admit, I had some teething problems initially with Zoom and MS Teams and all these different channels. I think now we're all getting used to that. It does open things up a little bit. And I think going forward, probably we'll continue to use those methods of communicating with each other, because it enables you to, well, it's more time efficient for one thing than attending physical meetings in many cases. So definitely, I think that has helped. And I think it will help going forward for our business development. I'm quite keen to get back on the circuit, though, and go and have a few drinks with people and that. But definitely, I think people getting used to communicating in this way has helped the business development process.
Absolutely. I mean, we see in the future a mixture of live and digital channels complementing each other. But perhaps you could give us a sense of a sketch of a client that you might work with in Hong Kong. What kind of services you offer them, what situations they're often in, and how you best service them. Yeah,
well, we offer UK and US tax services, but overwhelmingly the US side is most of our work comes on that side. And it's driven really by the sheer complexity of the rules. So we have a very broad range of different types of clients. So there's obviously the high net worth families who have large amounts of money and invested in different ways that generate that complexity. And so we're very happy to work with them and help them to keep on top of their compliance, and also to help them with their planning. Now, probably the bulk of our clients are the sort of working wealthy. So your entrepreneurs, the people in financial services, who, as well as the money that they earn from work, they've also maybe got investments and some complexities that come through that. But there are also the sort of self-employed businesses, people who have their own company, maybe a company established in Hong Kong or somewhere else in the region, and not necessarily hugely wealthy, but they have complexity because they've got a business entity that has to be reported, has to be dealt with, and the rules have just got more and more complicated, and the tax returns, as a consequence, have become quite unmanageable. So most people just can't do it on their own. They need someone to help. And we have so many cases that come to us, people who've tried to do it on their own and ended up in a bit of a mess, and then having to go back and fix things that have been done incorrectly in the past. So that's one area that we often our clients at the beginning start with a disclosure. It will be people who have maybe come to Hong Kong and got out of the habit of filing tax returns, and therefore, maybe because it just seemed too unmanageable, or maybe they thought they didn't have to while they were outside the US. And so, they got themselves into trouble, realized they need to do a disclosure. Often they come to us through law firms who have found them first. And then, we help the law firms and the client by doing the tax return preparation. So most of our work is sort of focused around that compliance element. But of course, around that, we can look at opportunities for people to save tax as well. And so we work with the lawyers and with the clients to try and get the best outcome.
I mean, off the back of that kind of disclosure and update of their affairs, I mean, how often does it end in a conversation around expatriation and people deciding, if they've been rooted in the region for a long time, how many sort of US taxpayers explore what it would mean for them to, give up their citizenship and, look at other options?
Well, yeah, we find a lot of people wanting to do that. In the UK, my clients there, because the UK taxes are generally higher than the US taxes, and because you have foreign tax credits that ultimately mean that usually there isn't very much US tax to pay, often people are more able to live with the difficulties around the compliance, because there isn't a huge tax bill that comes with it. In Hong Kong, that's very different, because Hong Kong is a low tax jurisdiction, and the US is relatively high. So you don't have that full offset with foreign tax credits. And as a result, that means that, when you do that disclosure, often there's a tax bill that has to be paid. And, as well as the compliance fees and the sort of the stress and the difficulties around it. So that can lead people to explore the options around expatriation. And that's, so I would say, yes, we see that much more often here than we do in the UK. A lot of those disclosures do end in an expatriation. And usually it's people who have, they've pretty much cut their ties with the US. They've moved here to settle here, maybe got married to someone here and started a family here, in Hong Kong or within the region. So, often they're more comfortable with the prospect of relinquishing their US status.
And there's obviously a lot of discussion about the new Biden administration, tax rates on the rise, use of allowances while they're still available. Are you seeing that flowing through to the clients that you deal with, a certain nervousness about increased tax on wealth linked to this new administration?
Definitely, yeah. There's some activity going on around that. And it's mainly to do with, most of what we're seeing is tax planning around estate tax. So a lot of gifting in preparation for the time when the estate tax exclusion is reduced, which is likely to happen at some point. It's still not entirely clear when or to what extent, but currently there's a huge exemption. It's over 11 million US dollars. So most people are under that threshold. But if you bring that down to sort of 3 million or something like that, a lot of people are going to be over that. So taking advantage of the big exclusion that's available now to make gifts to pass wealth on to the next generation, is obviously very prudent sort of tax planning. And yes, we have seen people who are quite interested in exploring that option and the other things around that you can do.
Okay, thanks. And I mean, where trusts are set up, where you have offshore trusts with US resident beneficiaries, as in modern families, a number of the next generation will go abroad and make their way in the world. If you have US beneficiaries on structures, perhaps you could give us a sense of what some of the issues are around how they might receive distributions, what might happen on the impact of the death of a settlor, perhaps resident in Hong Kong. If you sketch out some of the issues that you might face there.
Yeah, well, yeah, a lot of wealthy families do use trusts as a part of their long-term tax planning. And, you know, a lot of wealthy families in Asia have done that as, you know, very sensible sort of long-term planning. But in many cases, they have not done that planning with US tax implications in mind. So, you know, there may, at the time of a settlement into a trust, there may not be any US beneficiaries. But then when the settlor passes away, and then, you know, the beneficiaries then become entitled to distributions, it may well be that some of those beneficiaries have naturalized to the US or acquired green cards or relocated there and become resident in the US. And then you have a huge headache, really, unless you deal with it promptly and effectively, because you would then have what we call, in most cases, it would be a foreign non-grantor trust for US tax purposes. And distributions to beneficiaries from foreign non-grantor trusts are subject to some quite punitive rules. They're called the throwback rules, where you apportion accumulated income and gains to each year that it's deemed to have arisen in, and then taxed at the highest possible rate in those years, and then with interest charges attached to them, as though the distribution, the tax on that distribution is being paid late. So this can cause very high tax liabilities. If you have a trust that has US beneficiaries at that point in time, you know, where the settlor has passed away. And the way to eliminate that exposure, or to deal with it, is to make sure that distributions are made promptly and at the right time. So there's a lot of calculations needing to be done at that point to work out what needs to be distributed. And then, you know, elections have to be made and the necessary reporting. So we can help with that. And we work with some of the lawyers in that space here to do that sort of number crunching. It's usually quite intense, usually needs to be done very quickly. You have a sort of 2-month window to just get all of that done.
Okay, and you know, as we touched on, you know, in the modern high net worth families, the next generation will often go overseas for education, for business, and the UK and the US are two very complex tax environments for those arriving with pre-existing wealth that needs to be looked at before they become tax resident. I mean, perhaps you could set out, it's a huge topic, but perhaps you could set out a few things that you tend to discuss with those considering, you know, relocation to the UK or the US with pre-existing wealth, and how they're going to manage that when they're resident in the UK or US.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we can advise people to some extent on both US and UK tax for people moving to those jurisdictions. On the US side, often it's more complicated, because you in many cases you're going to need some kind of structure to protect the wealth that you have before you become a US resident. So often, of course, that means working with lawyers and other service providers to get everything in place. Sometimes insurance is a solution for people in that situation, just to protect that off the wealth that's outside the US from US tax. So other times it's going to be a trust or some sort of corporate arrangement. On the UK side, there are a lot more sort of simple options. The UK is a high tax jurisdiction. It's much less friendly than Hong Kong, So if you just move to the UK with a lot of existing wealth without doing any planning, you can end up facing some, very high tax bills. But the UK does still have quite a favourable regime for non-domiciles. So you can be resident but non-UK domiciles. There's a sort of distinction between those two concepts. Residence is much more about the here and now and how much time you're spending in the UK. And domicile is more sort of long-term concept. It's more about where you come from and where you feel you belong. So it's much more based on your intentions and the sort of long-term profile that you have. And if you happen to be resident in the UK but non-domiciled, there is a possibility of keeping a lot of your overseas income and gains out of UK tax. If you're able to use what we call a remittance basis. And using the remittance basis means that that income is not taxable in the UK until it is brought there. But in order to benefit from that, you need to have the right sort of planning in place before you become UK resident. And there's quite a lot to work through. And so that's where we can help by just talking through it with people, finding out what their interests are, what really concerns them, what are the things that they can change to benefit from those rules. And of course, the other thing is inheritance tax. Hong Kong doesn't really have currently an exposure to inheritance tax, but the UK does. So keeping assets out of the UK if you're non-domiciled can of course be very beneficial from that perspective as well. Keeping the wealth out of inheritance tax so that it can be passed on to the next generation.
Okay, well, wonderful. Thank you for talking to me today, Allan, and we look forward to sharing this video with our members.